So I actually got a call from Department of Wildlife and
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and they called me and they left me a voicemail and they were like, "Yeah, you didn't have a license for this import,"
Oh
and I
my
was like,
God.
"Yeah." I mean, you never want to get a call from anyone like
Yeah, from
so.
anybody, like
Yeah,
in itself.
well, it depends on the genus and species of the actual
Yeah.
kangaroo. So
Got it.
yeah. So
So
genus and
not all
species
are equal. Yep.
plays a
Wow.
really big part in that whole process, and you have to learn that too because that could get you into a world of trouble if you don't declare it appropriately.
I haven't thought about genus and species since grad
Yeah,
school. Go figure.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's crazy, man. I mean,
I
yeah,
will say though that the kangaroo leathers, for those of you who are watching, are fantastic. As you can see, one of the things I love about these washed kangaroo hides is that they roll they don't crease. I've worn this about 5 or 6 times now, and I intentionally, I usually I put shoe trees. So like in my shoe trees, you can see it smooths out with the tree in, but I intentionally took it out just because I was like, I wanted to kind of commend you on how well clicked this boot is, as well as
yeah,
how it ride, because it's not obviously just the leather and how it's laid down, but it's also how it's clicked and patterned, and the rolls are very symmetric on both of the boots, and the boot and this leather does not crease. So really amazing to have a boot that kind of looks equal on both of my feet after being broken in, which is something with I have slightly, I think my feet are about a quarter size different from one size to the other, so they break
yeah,
often differently, and so it's not a fault of the maker or anything. It's just how my feet are, and these rolled hides just work magic. I just find them fascinating. So commend you on choosing that. So I was kind of curious about your experience working with different tanneries and how that experience has translated to what you offer.
yeah. No, it's yeah, no, Gallon, yeah, Ed. So Ed's the owner.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've gotten real cool with Ed. Specifically over the past year.
Yeah.
Try to run a lot of his stuff. It's really great leather,
Yeah.
and it's different too than what you see with the all of the standard offerings out there today. I
Yeah.
mean, Horween's great leather as well, but
Sure.
Ed does give something a little bit more different.
Yeah.
He also allows me to add kind of like a little extra flavor to it. And he sends me a lot of his prototype leathers that I use for sampling. So
Wow.
yeah, just trying to mix it up with things that people haven't seen yet, like
Yeah.
the various horse butt options that we run. Like we just ran a hand welted ready to wear with what's called Big Sky Natural Calf.
Yeah, I saw that.
So,
It's
yeah,
the
yeah,
aniline dye. Like, yeah, I was curious about that because that's not a leather I've seen very typically on a boot of that make. That's kind of
yeah.
how it would evolve in patina, and it's not just a veg tan leather; it has a different style to it.
Yeah. So it's a like when Ed sends me the descriptions of the leather, I have to like decipher what's what's being said.
Yeah.
Because like it's because he'll mix it up. He'll say this is a combination tan leather, and we add like 15 different other materials to give it this sort of look to it, and you have to kind of look it up on Google to figure out what this word means, stuff like that. So I'm not a tannage expert.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to be. So, I understand basic tannages, but sometimes they do some crazy stuff,
Yeah.
and I have to have that explained to me too. But no, it's a beautiful leather. So
Yeah.
with aniline leather, it's going to have a lot of those natural kind of characteristics to it. We ran a caramel oiled shoulder. That's an aniline leather, so you're going to see a lot of the actual kind of markings of the animal, which I kind of prefer. It
Yeah.
just gives it a more authentic look to it.
Yeah.
Uh, and so this leather specifically, it comes out in a very natural honeyish color, but it has a lot of those natural characteristics to it, which I think really bring out the boot. Plus, when you run it in an unstructured toe, I think once you wear it in, and that natural kind of turns into what it needs to be, it
Yeah.
just really shows really well. You make a pattern.
Yeah.
What they'll do is they'll grade the pattern, and from there they have like software that they can pretty much do an easy grade on the pattern
Got it.
before you go into sampling. So it starts with an idea, you draw it out.
Yeah.
If you have your last on hand, you can actually do the pattern to the last.
Got it.
I generally do that because I suck at grading, but my patterning is pretty decent. So
Yeah.
generally I do that because beforehand, what I used to do is basically just take a picture, I draw it out,
Yeah.
uh, and kind of add in the things I wanted. I'd send it over, and my sampling would come out just not how I wanted it. So you wind up actually
Mm,
losing money when you do that. So at least if you
interesting.
have the last and you can make the pattern to the last,
Yep.
it doesn't have to be perfect, but at least you can kind of get the general sense of how it needs to look for your specific last.
That's
So it actually winds up saving you money in the long run.
yeah,
Um, and it you're sampling, you don't have to go through 3 or 4 samples because sampling takes time.
of course.
So, I generally like to make 1 or 2 samples and call it a day.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, in order to do that,
Yeah.
that helps speed up the process a little bit more. But yeah, they have great software to kind of grade out
Yeah.
all of the patterns, stuff like that. So,
I'd heard a little bit about this on some of the podcasts from Stitch Down and just talking a little bit about grading. I think they had Nathan Florsheim who's doing
yeah,
F Bootmaker and talking a little bit about grading his last. And I
I
didn't
suck.
quite
I suck at it. So,
yeah, but it's interesting that
absolutely.
you could have this idea and draw it up because I've designed a few boots and shoes over my time and had other makers make them. The Crew Nonpareil is running one of them now, and there's been a couple others, Monroe Heritage, but I haven't taken that into account. So that's all happening somewhere. I just sort of draw my picture and send it off, and somehow they decide to do all
Yeah.
that. So fascinating to know that it takes not just the drawing of the pattern and an idea for a last, but actually kind of saying, okay, we're taking that last. We're going to have to kind of essentially sounds like drape the pattern over the last in a way that makes
Yeah.
sense. Is that fair to say that that's sort of what
Yeah.
draping
Because
means? Yeah.
so, just taking the extra step.
Yeah.
It's helped me specifically. You don't necessarily have to do that.
Yep.
And I'm not saying I do it perfectly
Yeah.
because my patterning is not perfect whatsoever. But it's helped me
Yeah.
kind of like it's a lesson learned. There are certain things that kind of, if you kind of take it on, it can help you in the long run. So that's one thing I've kind of tried to do to get the patterns because like specifically like with the Lisbon 2, even
Yeah.
with the quarter design, it's slightly different from uh, a standard service boot or a standard mocktail boot, like with the
Yeah.
stitch.
The back heel counter is different and has a different kind
Yeah,
of element with the yeah.
yeah. So yeah, you just getting that, like
Yeah.
even with the dimensions of that, like if you put it on the last and it looks too well, one, if you run in a boot and you know, it just the dimensions don't kind of line up, it can look
Yeah.
really odd. So it just takes a lot of effort to try and get it to what makes sense.
Yeah, to
Um,
what you kind of envision it to actually be. It sounds
yeah,
like
yeah,
that effort. All these little details that you assume, I think a lot of us have this sort of romantic vision of what it would take to do what you're doing, but there's so many logistics, let alone the business end of it. Some of the things
yeah,
we've talked about with importing
yeah,
and, declaring your leathers and all this stuff to like just how to implement a design in a meaningful way. It's really cool to hear your process and I appreciate you sharing it with us. And so I was curious about your own inspirations for bootmaking.
yeah.
Like obviously as an enthusiast who was in this space, I'm sure you were inspired. I kind of wanted to hear about those inspirations.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean the Spain line is a lot more
Yeah.
dressier, of course.
Yep.
So that has a lot of inspiration from, all of the main Spanish brands, Carmina, Mirman, the big three for
Yeah.
the most part. And then draw a lot of inspiration from Crockett as well, Voss,
Yeah, I can see that.
Enzo. That was kind of like those were the brands that I would mainly have in my collection. A lot of custom offerings from those makers.
Yeah.
And so I kind of took that kind of how they how they do their branding, how they do their lasts, how they do their styling.
Yeah.
Took that and tried to build it into something that's grown into what you see today. It
Yeah.
first it started off a little kind of did a standard service boot and try to keep it very very simplified because you want to appeal to the most amount of customers as possible because what people don't understand, like there's a difference between being a collector and making a product that people actually want to buy from you.
Yeah.
So there's a different thought process that goes into that. Because as a collector, I would say, all right, I want, this full custom, XYZ leather. I want this to be like this, and I want this specific detail. But 90% of people don't care about that stuff. In order to appeal to them, you have to have something that can broadly make sense for them. That's why
Yep.
I think Thursday Boots does a good job, because they can just appeal to a broad base of people.
5 years ago, before I was really in this community the way I am now, that would have been, I would have been shocked by a $200 boot. Now I'm almost dismissive of
Yeah.
a $200 boot. But like, yeah, it's an interesting space that you're in, because I think the vast majority of people out there wouldn't would be almost have sticker shock about a 300 or a $350 boot,
They
which
do.
is largely where you price
They
a lot
do.
of
Oh,
your
yeah.
boots. But yet you're still trying to justify, hey, you're getting so much for your money. And now, for looking from the other side as a kind of a avid enthusiast, I see your boots as incredible value, high quality leathers, beautiful lasts, wonderful choice of soles. The work is, they're very
Yeah.
clean. They're extremely comfortable, by the way. I commend you on just the comfort that's built into these boots. I can wear these all day without any fatigue at all. How you get somebody from, going to DSW to like being a
Yes.
little bit more enthusiastic enough to spend $300, and finding that market is got to be an interesting space.
Yeah. And like, even at $300, that's still mid tier
Yeah,
for, standard
most
Goodyear wells.
people. Yeah,
Yeah. There's a big sticker shock for a lot of people, and just paying over $300 for boots that, like, you don't really grasp that concept as a collector, right?
yeah,
Like, for me, back in the days, like when I used to try and do like a lot of custom, like it would run me like at least, a decent chunk of change, to where
yeah,
I wouldn't think twice about it.
yeah,
But as an average consumer who may only have like sneakers or something like that, if I was to get a boot, I would look at $300 and say, hey, that's a lot of money.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
you have to try and make it make sense for them.
Yeah,
And that's a large part of my customer base. So I
yeah,
try to really, really explain to them what they're getting,
yeah.
and, give them different leather variety that may cost a little bit more at another brand.
And I tell people, you're going to spend a little bit more, but you're going to get a boot that's recraftable for the rest of your life. These
Yeah.
leathers don't scuff up and just fall apart after a year. If you take care of them minimally, you're going to have them last forever. And I try to get them to understand that a $300 pair of boots is going to save them a lot of money in the long run. It does argue a little bit against the American consumerism model of like, get something,
Yes.
refresh something. But I think the fact that you're choosing really high quality leathers that do evolve over the course of their lifetime, that gives you it's almost like a fine wine that you will wait on for a while before it becomes its real identity. Same thing with these boots. I just think that you've done a really good job to kind of find that space, and kind of bringing people into this.
I don't know of any other brand outside of like a Viberg that runs the different leather offerings all in one brand. Like, take for example, like if you were to look at like a Crockett or
Yeah,
some of the more established brands, they'll run a couple different options. Like, they'll run some Stead, they'll run
yep,
some I think they run some Bakers,
yep,
but not 15 or so at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So, that's what the collector's mindset
yeah,
is why we run those different offerings. So,
yeah.
because last year was the full official year of fully doing sales, like with the ready to wear line, and then
Mhm.
the second year we added in the hand welted line. So generally, most brands don't try to do it that fast,
Yeah,
and for good reason.
yeah,
But I kind of wanted to add a different element, something that can kind of elevate the brand. And so when I was kind of looking at regional locations where you can kind of make this happen for under $1,000 price point, I
yeah,
mean, really, you're only left with two kind of options, either China or Indonesia.
yep,
So from there, I had a good amount of samples made, and I needed a couple different things that were going to happen. One, I need to make sure that the quality was like, you know, it needed to be to a certain point to where I can compete with the bigger brands, and that's
sure.
reflected in my build cost, because I pay an elevated build cost to be able to ensure that they come out as perfect as possible.
Yeah,
Two, I needed to ensure that I have turnaround time for a lot of that,
yep,
and I wanted to be able to use like as many different materials as I could potentially source,